Hello, everybody. Um, this is Victoria Targett. I am one of three team leaders in the Diet, Obesity and Physical Activity division at Public Health England that leads the programme of work on reduction and reformulation. With me, I have my colleague Bethany, who works on the SALT programme specifically. After many years personally, myself of working on the SALT programme between around 2004 and 2014, my work now focuses more on the sugar and calorie reduction parts of the reformulation programme. But Bethany is now one of the members of the team who are working specifically on SALT. So if there is anything that I get stuck on, I'm hoping she's going to be able to help. But as my preamble indicates, I've been working on reduction and reformulation for a number of years. And I think there are some people in the room who I have met and who have seen me present previously. Thank you very much for including us in the meeting today. It's really good to be able to give some information on the England and UK experience. And just to give a little bit of a background on the division as a whole here at Public Health England, we are allied to the Department of Health and Social Care, but slightly separate to them. We, however, provide diet and nutrition advice across pretty much the whole of government when needed, to the Departments of Agriculture, Education, to our Treasury Department in relation to our soft drinks industry levy, and various other bits and pieces of government, and also to a whole range and interact with a whole range of other stakeholders that you can see listed at the bottom of the slide. So on now to talk about the salt reduction work. So the SALT programme started in the UK in 2004. It followed recommendations from the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition, which is our independent body that provides advice to government on all matters relating to diet and health and nutrition. So they made a recommendation in 2003 that adult population salt intake should reduce to no more than around 6 grams per day. This was looked on as an optimal, not an optimal, sorry, level of intake. That's actually 4 grams. But the 6 gram figure was felt to be more achievable in terms of where intakes were at that point. We have so far to date set 4 sets of salt reduction targets, which have been published over a number of years. They have generally covered around 80 different categories of foods and have been backed up, particularly in the early days of the programme, with public awareness work. And all of this means that we have so far seen gradual stepwise reductions in salt levels across different categories, with reductions of up to 50% in some products up to this point. The programme is now focused, or since nations became devolved, applies to England only, but because of the UK food supply is very countrywide, and so whatever is done in England with relation to salt will actually apply across the other countries of the UK, so Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. As the top of the slide says, we have so far seen reduction in intakes of around 1 gram a day. So it's gone down now to around 8 grams. And that's an 11% reduction since the programme began. It's to us, a very significant and substantial reduction that we have achieved. And it's also very heartening to see that around a third of the population is estimated to be meeting the 6 gram intake target that was set by the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition. In terms of the 2017 SALT targets, these were published in 2014 and were, if you like, the last thing I did on the salt reduction programme before I moved over to work on sugar and calories. For the first time in 2017, we set some specific targets for the out-of-home sector. These were set slightly differently to the in-home targets. And so were quite different for us. The categories in our salt targets are quite specific, at least the in-home ones. The out-of-home ones were much broader and covered a significant number of products within a smaller number of categories. And that's a change that we have replicated more in the work that we've gone on to do around sugar and are now looking to do in relation to calories. Public Health England republished those targets in 2017 once the reduction and reformulation programme shifted from the Department of Health over to Public Health England. There has been a bit of a movement of the reformulation programme because it initially started at the Food Standards Agency, but it seems to have a pretty safe home at the moment at Public Health England. And the progress report that we published in December last year now assesses the extent to which the 2017 targets have been met. So we have 3 different types of targets that we have set. The first is a simple average, which we also call a processing average. The purpose of this is to allow some leeway for those products that are based on naturally occurring sodium and all the makeup of food. So, for example, bacon, the amount of sodium or salt that you will get in bacon depends on the fat to lean meat ratio within the pig carcass that you're using to make the bacon. And so that's the kind of product where the simple average applies. We have a sales weighted average, which means that the sodium content of individual products is weighted by their volume sales, meaning that a high volume selling high salt product will provide a larger contribution to the sales weighted average than a lower selling, lower sodium level product. The purpose of having a sales weighted average is to allow businesses to have a range of products within the category, so different flavours, different types, and it just gives them some continued flexibility in the products that they have on the market. However, we also have maximum sodium values, and the idea of those is that no individual product in the category should exceed that figure. We also, when we set the targets for the out-of-home sector, they were set specifically on a maximum per serving basis, rather than on a per 100 grams basis as the other targets were. We consider that average targets have been met if the average sodium content of the category is below or within 5% of the target. Maximum targets have only been assessed in relation to the number of products that are either at or below that maximum target that we have set. This just illustrates a bit what the targets look like. In the top left-hand corner are what we call our in-home targets. These are more focused on achievement by retailers and manufacturers specifically, but because the out-of-home targets were only first produced in 2014, they were the targets that catering companies and the out-of-home sector were working towards before they had their own set of targets. The out-of-home targets are in the bottom right-hand part of the screen, and it's a relatively good example, I suppose, of showing the specificity of the in-home targets, and that we have separate ones for yeast raised and powder raised morning goods, all very specific. We know that retailers and manufacturers actually quite like having targets that are that specific. It makes it easier for them to achieve them, or so they tell us. Whereas actually I think probably the broader categories do work quite well for the out-of-home sector. So we published our progress report in December 2018. It looks at the analysis of the salt and sodium content of in-home and out-of-home food, and it assesses the extent to which the salt reduction targets have been met. The report only looks at things on an overall, on an overall and category basis. It doesn't yet look at things in relation to individual businesses with top selling products, which is the way that we have assessed things through our sugar reduction program. It is also the first time a report of this kind had been published for the salt reduction programme in the UK. Although we had done various other things to transparently and comprehensively monitor the programme of our report, we had not previously put together, of the programme, we had not previously put together a report of this kind. So in terms of the data sources that we use, if it's of any interest, we use commercially available data for both the in and out of home sector. We use Kantar World Panel data to provide us with data for the in-home sector, both nutrition information and volume sales. And we have a data set that has around 112,000 products. In terms of the out-of-home data, we have only used nutrition information because we don't have sales weighted averages for out of home, and there are various limitations with our out of home data that means that it is difficult to calculate and assess the sector on a sales weighted average basis. The data set for the out-of-home sector has around 23,000 products. In terms of coding, we do our best to code individual products to the correct categories. I suspect there are some that sometimes slip into the wrong place, but we did that. It was coded by nutritionists, and all the data and analysis that we have produced were produced and QA'd internally by our analysts. We produced a whole range of metrics to assess progress. They are listed here. I'm not going to go through all of them now, but you will get an idea of which of those that are listed here are kind of the most important in assessing progress as I go through the next few slides. So the results for in-home, so retailer own brand and manufacturer branded products. Our assessment showed that around 52% of all average salt reduction targets that had been set to be achieved by the end of 2017 were achieved by that point. Retailers have made more progress than manufacturers by quite a significant degree. I'm not sure if that's statistically significant, but substantial is possibly a better word. And for both manufacturers and retailers combined, when you look at them together, average targets were met for 9 product categories. These are listed here. I think some of the notable ones probably are breakfast cereals because they make quite a significant contribution to intakes. Also pizzas, because it can be difficult to reduce salt in pizzas from so many different parts of the product, and also stocks and gravies, which are quite high, naturally high in sodium in the way they're manufactured and made. We did set a relatively high target for those products. It was the first time we had set targets for those products within the 2017 targets. So we may have I don't know, been slightly more lenient because we weren't sure how easy it would be to achieve a target in those categories. When we look at the maximum targets that we set within the in-home targets, 81, when you put all the products together across all the categories that have maximum targets, 81% of the products that are covered by those categories had salt levels that were at or below their target. This is a really high figure and shows that clearly that there has been some substantial work by industry over the last 10, 14 years, 15 years to achieve the reductions that we are asking them to do. It is interesting and notable that meat products did not meet any of their average targets, and fewer than half had achieved the maximums. It's interesting because meat products are difficult to reduce salt in for a number of technical reasons. It is also one category where salt continues to provide a true food safety barrier. When I say true, I mean in terms of preventing things like Clostridium botulinum, rather than preventing the growth of mold and things. Not that molds are desired or wanted, obviously, but they are not as serious in terms of illness or life-threatening, I suppose, as some things like Clostridium botulinum. They had also, the meat product targets had been set quite strictly. And so, it's interesting that some progress had at least been made in terms of achieving the maximums. As
Can
with
I ask a question?
Please.
Can you just explain to me what you mean by retailers versus manufacturers? When you
Of
talk about
course.
retailers, are you talking about private label brands versus branded products?
So retailers are supermarkets, and supermarkets have a lot of products that are branded for the supermarket that they are sold in. To us, we call them retailer own brand. But yes, that must be private label, as you refer to. Apologies. Manufacturers are very much branded products, so that includes things like Heinz tomato ketchup, for example. Whereas a retailer own brand, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a supermarket. So we have Asda, which is part of Walmart, and so it would be the same as a Walmart own brand product. Is that clear?
Yeah, thank you.
Not at all. So when we look at the average targets, retailers performed better than manufacturers, with nearly double the amount of categories having 75% or more of products at or below the max. Again, some quite substantial and significant work has been done. When we look at the results for the out-of-home sector, in 5 out of the 11 categories that we have, at least 75% of products had salt levels at or below the maximum per serving target. This again is quite a substantial achievement. I seem to keep saying that, but it is really notable. The out-of-home sector is a sector that we have difficulties engaging in our reduction and reformulation programs, so much so that we now have a specific team that takes forward engagement with them. They, until a year or two ago, had been continuing to say that eating out was a treat, which is not something that we as government officials agree with. People eat out an awful lot more. Eating out contributes 20 to 25% of the calories that we consume, and we all do it really regularly. There were some products where about half of products had salt levels above the maximum. So that's burgers in a bun and pasta meals, which is interesting. You might think that a pasta, you're having something healthily, eating healthily when you're having a pasta meal out of the home. But clearly that's not necessarily the case when you consider that nearly half of those dishes are still above the maximum. When you look across all the subcategories, 71% of products had salt levels at or below the maximum set for the category. We were able to calculate, I said earlier that we couldn't calculate sales weighted averages for the out-of-home sector, but we could look at things in order to be able to make comparisons with in-home. We were able to look at things in a slightly different way, because so where there was read across in terms of the type of food included in a category, and where there was a maximum target set by both for in and out of home, we were able to do some comparison. And when you look at those categories and the number of products within those, around 75% of out of home products and 84% of manufacturers and retailers combined had achieved, were either at or below the maximum target that we had set. But it's also interesting to note that achievements for out of home were more similar to manufacturers than retailers, with retailers being having the highest degree of products that were at or below the maximum. We also did some analysis to look at the categories that contribute most to salt intakes, and that does include some meat products, as well as some other foods. I suspect baked beans, it might be a particularly British product. I'm not sure how many cans of Heinz baked beans sell in North America, but I suspect there's probably read across to quite a lot of other categories included. And from this, we can see that around half of the average targets in these subcategories were met, and that the proportion of products that were at or below the maximum ranged quite widely, from to only just about half for some to as much as 99% in others. It's also interesting to note that the proportion of products that were at or below the maximum targets for out of home, where these categories applied, range significantly, also from around 41% to around 50%. So there is some very substantial variation, I think it's fair to say, across different categories, across different sectors, both in and out of home. There are a number of limitations to our data, as I'm sure you can imagine. I think the key ones to note are that not all reformulation that will have been completed by 31st of December 2017 will have been included in our analysis. And we do know that from past work to assess progress, that businesses do sometimes leave it right up until the last minute to put those new products on the market. There are some issues with the data that we have around some bread and morning goods and cakes products. And in terms of the out-of-home sector, we don't have mandatory calorie labeling for out-of-home businesses, and so we are only able to include in our analysis for that sector those businesses that have that available, and that may or may not fully be representative of the sector as a whole. There are a number of challenges in running reduction and reformulation programs, as I'm sure many people will know. Now we have our programme at Public Health England. We are covering a number of different nutrients and foods at the same time, so sugar and calories and salt. We are also now working on those foods that are aimed at babies and children younger than 36 months. And so that in itself is a significant challenge, both for us but also for industry, because we are asking businesses to look at a significant number of the products in their portfolio for a number of different nutrients. For the sugar reduction programme, we are aiming for businesses to achieve sugar reduction without increasing calories, without increasing saturated fat, and also working towards achieving the salt targets. So we are asking a lot of businesses, and we appreciate that. But from the reductions that we have seen achieved, we know that it is possible for businesses to do. In terms of the data, I've spoken about our challenge that we have there, and I've also spoken a bit about the challenges around stakeholder engagement, particularly around the out-of-home sector. But for us, there is also from a civil servant and running a programme perspective, is the amount of time that takes, and the fact that we are forever trying to remain transparent within the work that we are doing and publish updates. Obviously, for business, there are technical issues with making reductions, not just in terms of actually getting products through the factory, but also around food safety and consumer acceptability. There is often changing consumer demand in relation to what products they would like, and also market competition. There's also a bit of a thing around, well, we don't want to change our product because we fear we will lose business to our competitors if they do not. And we understand the issues associated with that. There are a host of other wider challenges. Brexit is a particular one that seems to have been occupying us for a number of years now and still has not gone away. It applies both pre and post Brexit, so we're still in a very space position on that. Our agricultural department, DEFRA, recently announced that they were going to start working on a food strategy, and so then that presents its own new challenges. And there are also a number of other commitments that are being taken forward through our work, through the government's work around target safety as a whole. Following publication of the report, we have had some documents from our Department of Health and Social Care and also our Chief Medical Officer, which indicated that some additional work on salt would need to be done, and that that information on that would be published this year. And so, lo and behold, in July this year, our government prevention green paper was published, which has set out a ambition to reduce the population salt intakes to 7 grams a day. And that within this, we will look to review and revise the current reduction targets that we have for 2017, and we'll publish new targets next year and for industry to achieve these by mid-2023. So it says here that we will commission a urinary sodium survey in 2023 as well. We have previously completed one of these surveys I think earlier this year, and the results of that the first urinary sodium survey that we have done, or the next one, is due to be published in spring next year, and then there will be the subsequent one in 2023. So we'll see where we get to by that point. So we are now looking to begin to work with businesses and work forward on our stakeholder engagement around salt, to work towards reviewing and revising the categories, and also looking at complementary strategies around marketing and providing advice, as was done in the early days of the programme. That's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I hope it gives you an idea of the work that we've done, and I'm happy to take any questions that anyone may have.